One day, Jackson was sadly arriving at the mainline reconstruction with the breakdown train. "Cheer up, Jackson," called Jack. "Okay, Jack," Jackson said sadly. "It's all my fault. I should have been careful with the breakdown train." "No problems, Jackson," inquired Jack. "I sometimes make mistakes." "And just like me," said Max, "I sometimes make mistakes too." Jackson felt sorry. Once Jackson was leaving the main line, he saw Gordon returning from the works. That evening at the sheds, James told Gordon about the express accident the other day. "Imagine Jackson," said Gordon. "He knocked one of my express coaches off the rails." "Unacceptable, James." "Not unacceptable for me," said James. "Unacceptable for Jackson." "We understand," said Henry. "It's not your fault. You sometimes have accidents, too." "We know," said Gordon. "Thanks for pulling the express for me, James." "I know," said James. "Jackson is sadly doing some work at the closed main line." "I'm sure he is," said Henry. "I'm very proud of you, James," said Percy. "You were careful yesterday." "Yes, I did," said James. "And I heard that you were being nice to Jackson, too," said Emily. "Great job, James." "In that case," said Henry, "Emily, you look very quiet. So what's up?" "Oh," said Emily, "it's because I have nothing to say, and I'm tired right now." "I bet you are," said Henry. So Percy and Emily were fast asleep, but not Gordon, Henry, and James. They were trying all sorts of ways and thinking about Jackson. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt has asked Jackson to pull the morning train. It was a very long train indeed. "Oh, what will I do now?" Jackson complained as he buffered up into his freight train. But then Jackson heard a whistle. It was Gordon with the express. "It's Gordon!" cried Jackson. "I better hide in my shed." So Jackson left his train and he stopped in the shed until Gordon passed by. "Definitely clumsy," snorted Gordon. Soon, Jackson reversed out of the shed and he backed into the freight train. He was raring to go. Jackson knew he must be very careful with the express train next time. Jackson was being careful with the freight train. He was feeling pleased with himself. So the troublesome trucks, on the other hand, started to play tricks on Jackson. "Come on, reckless Jackson," they said. "Let's go faster! Let's go faster!" Soon, Jackson reached Gordon's Hill. So Jackson really wanted to stop. "No one can see me now," said Jackson to himself. The trucks had an idea. "Now," they said, and they started to push Jackson down a hill. "Ooh!" cried Jackson. "I can't stop!" Jackson rocketed past James. "Slow down!" shouted James. Jackson was in such a fright that he couldn't stop. He blew his whistle loudly. Suddenly, Jackson heard a whistle. "Oh dear!" he cried. "It's Gordon and the express!" Then Jackson noticed something else. That looks like a tar wagon, he said. I'll take that. Jackson whistled loudly and got the signalman's attention. The points were switched, and Jackson was diverted into the siding. Whoa! Cried Jackson. Whoa! They were just in time. Gordon thundered by aghast at what he'd seen. Oh dear, Jackson moaned. I am a silly engine, and now look what has happened to me. Even the car had slid out of the flatbed during the crash. Then Henry arrived. Hello, Jackson, whistled Henry. Oh, Henry, gasped Jackson. I thought I crashed into you, and I thought you were pulling the tar wagon. Henry was confused. No, I wasn't, said Henry. I just had an express run with Gordon, that's all. Anyway, I'm gonna go for help. Then, James arrived at the yards and saw what had happened. How did you get this mess? Chuckled James. It's a long story, Jackson said sadly, and I do want to get cleaned up. James knew that Jackson was sorry. The breakdown train will come soon, said James. Soon, Jackson was back on the rails. Honestly, Jackson, said Sir Topham Hatt, why did you crash into the tar wagons? I was out of control, sir, Jackson apologized. And I'm very sorry for having an accident, sir. Gordon has just had an accident at the crossing a couple of days ago, said Sir Topham Hatt, and now you're in a mess, and we cannot have the yellow engine out of commission. Jackson was relieved. I really need a washdown now, he said. Good, said Sir Topham Hatt. We'll get you cleaned up in no time. That evening at the sheds, the engines were all worried about Jackson. I'm sorry he got into a tar wagon accident, said Emily. You don't need to apologize now, Emily, said Gordon. Jackson will be fine. Yes, he will, said James. I'm sorry I made rude remarks about him the other day. Look, everyone, said Percy. Jackson's back. And he was. Jackson was shiny and clean once again. The engines whistled and cheered and saw that Jackson has returned from the works. Thank you, everyone, said Jackson. I'm glad to be a really useful engine again. Welcome back, Henry said happily. And you're finally clean, whistled Gordon. And there'll be no mistakes about you anymore, James declared. Jackson smiled. Kind manners, he said. I'm very happy. Now Jackson can do his favorite job again, and it's called pulling the express. Jackson would wonder if he could race with Gordon someday. Once Jackson got home, there was a really rousing welcome for Jackson, the new yellow engine. From that day on, Jackson could tell stories with the other engines.